Talking about these security threats, what's the one that really keeps you both up at night?
I mean, I've got to be honest. I mean, my principal security challenge when I was the security minister was, bluntly, they are murdering people, trying to murder people in the United Kingdom. They are trying to blow up factories. I think we underestimate how serious these people are.
It seems like the government, or it appears to be, quite deeply compromised.
But it has been pulled in a really troubling place now.
This stuff, I feel, should be much more of a scandal than it is.
You are seeing a renaissance in those who say,
Is that why the Muslim Brotherhood isn't banned? Is that why the IRGC isn't banned?
there's clear evidence of...
The thing is, you've got the Chinese spy scandal is one. You've also got the super embassy, and you've got the Chagos deal.
Look, all of this.
I mean,
all
this
of
is surely more than just cock up.
It's worse than that.
thing is that I think shown the true colours of these MPs and what they actually stand for, what their approach is.
And that chant is shouted hundreds of thousands of times by hundreds of thousands of people on these marches, week in, week out.
Yep.
So if it's an anti-Semitic chant, then Suella Braverman was right. These are hate marches. I mean, where's the point where we begin to clamp down upon them?
Evil exists, and you need to be absolutely clear that you will fight against it.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on The Brink. I'm Andrew Fox.
And I'm Jake Wallace-Simons. Now, in the wake of the banning of Israeli football fans from Birmingham, the Manchester synagogue atrocities and the continued Gaza protests despite the ceasefire, we've got a national security special for you this week.
And who better to join us than the former Security Minister and Conservative MP for Tonbridge, Tom Tugendhat, and former anti-extremism czar Lord Walney, John Woodcock, a former Labour MP who resigned when Jeremy Corbyn became leader, calling Corbyn a clear risk to national security.
Now, both of them have deep knowledge of the security challenges threatening us today, and they're speaking to us together exclusively on The Brink.
If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment and share it. And if you're listening on audio, please give the podcast 5 stars.
And now we present Tom Tugendhat and Lord Walney on The Brink. Tom Tugendhat and Lord Walney, John Woodcock, thank you for joining us on The Brink.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
So, Tory, Labour, do you know each other? You've obviously got the overlap of security concerns, national security expertise.
We do, and we both came in, you're 2010 and 10.
No, 2015.
Oh, God.
Yeah, no.
You're just so
So young and good looking. That's
exactly.
what you're looking for.
Yeah. But yes, I remember lobbying Tom extensively when he was a minister, and there was a huge amount of overlap and stuff.
And you did that great report for us, which was incredibly useful in changing some of the views, not as many as I'd have liked, but some of the views on protest and on outreach.
Well, thank you. I mean, we may get into this, but if only you could have just, lasted as a government more than 24 hours before we actually put it in. But anyway,
you're
water under the bridge.
Forgive me, I was not one of those advocating an early election.
Well, that escalated quickly. Anyway, thank you both for joining us. And Andrew, straight back from Israel.
Yeah, so I've been running around the West Bank all week. So quite relevant to security concerns, although clearly Israel has a slightly different problem set to the one that we do.
2 hours sleep, is that right?
About 2 hours sleep and no chance to even remotely trim the stubble, so apologies for that. But really, when we're talking about these security threats, I think maybe we start as broad as possible. What's the one that really keeps you both up at night?
I mean, I've got to be honest. I mean, my principal security challenge when I was the security minister was what Russia's doing, frankly. I mean, they are murdering people, trying to murder people in the United Kingdom. They are trying to blow up factories. They're trying to commit sabotage. I mean, they're trying a lot of things. Now, thank God we have a fantastic intelligence service. We've got some amazing police forces. We interrupt an awful lot, and we interrupt an awful lot before it even gets close to the UK. So it never becomes a credible threat. But they are serious, and I'm afraid so is China. China is serious in a different way. They're not doing sabotage, but they threaten people here in the United Kingdom. They steal secrets. You may think stealing secrets, well, that's the government's problem. No, it's everybody's problem. It damages the economy. It means that businesses fold because they can't compete, because the special way they're doing a certain thing has been stolen and is now being made at 1/10 of the price by forced labor in Xinjiang or whatever it is. And so you see this sort of real undermining of the economy. And then the third, which was a huge issue, is Iran. Now they're much more chaotic, but they're serious again. I mean, they've attempted more than 20 incidents in the UK in the last few years, and that's
assassinations and kidnaps.
Well, it's sort of attacks, assassinations, that sort of thing. And the head of MI5 spoke about it a little while ago, and I don't want to go into the details because for various reasons you would.
We can't ask a former intelligence corps officer to bust open the.
No, I'm not going to do that. But
ruin your vetting.
So. No, exactly. But I don't need to be vetted anymore. I'm Privy Council, so it's done. You see, I think we underestimate how serious these people are, and then we also have some homegrown problems, as you will probably be more than aware of.
And John, that's probably a good segue to you. If Tom's covered the sort of the big three international ones that, frankly, I was expecting.
Sure.
What would you say are the domestic ones that really concern you the most?
Well, it is understanding more and getting a better recognition, I think, within the political system of how these bleed through into domestic political concerns. And Tom, of course, absolutely right on those three major state threats. And of those two, I'm sure he's right that in terms of kinetic activity, Russia poses the greatest. But I think where we are in greater need of work is in a shared understanding within the system and with the public over the scale of threat that China and Iran both pose. Because I think probably you say Russia and everyone kind of nods and, decades of history, where with China we have for decades now given mixed messages as to what our relationship with the state should be. Some would say we are in the middle of doing that right now.
I would say we're
on a daily basis, but it is clearly like a huge conundrum, which makes it confusing for the public looking on, and also for the Whitehall system, where things can be really entrenched in different directions, and you don't know which way. Well, this is lead.
Bluntly, this is where there's some things the government's done quite well. There's other things where the government's really, I think, dropped the ball, and keeping the China audit secret, funnily enough, is one of those things. If you want a whole of government response, you need to tell your team and officials what it is that you're seeing and why it is a problem. If you produce it as a secret, then let's be honest, most government departments, most civil servants aren't cleared, and they don't need to be, and they're expensive and complicated, so they shouldn't be. But it means they're not responding because you haven't asked them to, you haven't told them about it, you don't know what the threat is. So keeping these things at that level just means that you actually don't have a China strategy.
But looking at it from the outside, it seems like the government is, or appears to be, quite deeply compromised when it comes to China. It feels to the public, I think, that you've got a prime minister who is working against the national security interests in favour of the Chinese. With the collapse of this spy case, which Keir Starmer appears to have some fingerprints on, but then blamed it on a civil servant. And if you look at the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, I mean, he himself has deep connections with the Chinese Communist Party, stretching back some time. So this stuff, I feel, should be much more of a scandal than it is.
So, interested in Tom's perspective on this, obviously, but I think I wouldn't put it as the government working in the interests of the Chinese. They do believe, I'm sure, that they're working in the British interest in terms of what they believe is the central importance of improving the economic relationship with China for the furtherance of the British state. But indeed, that is a recasting, no question about where the last government were, and it is having that you always have that level of tension between the immediate national security, immediate and long-term national security interest and the economic interest, but it has been pulled in a really troubling place now.
So I get that, but I just feel like you've got the economic interests of working with China. According to a cabinet minister source, Sunday Times, that the spy case was dropped to appease China that threatened to withdraw investment, for example. But then at the same time, the way the government's going about it isn't straightforward and honest and saying to people, look, we've got these two competing priorities. This is one we're going with.
Yeah.
They're using dirty tricks to do it.
So I've got to be honest with you, Jake. If the question is cock up or conspiracy, I normally go with cock up.
Well, in this case.
In this case, I think it's also cock up. I think, frankly, we're seeing what we know to be true, which is this government can't make decisions. And, Keir Starmer has been given a choice from the Treasury to balance the decision and a choice from his security professionals to balance a different one. And he's waffled it, again. Now, are there his fingerprints on it? Probably in some way, but not in the sense of, this is the worst of it, right? I wish there was leadership in one direction or the other, because along with John's point, I think there is an argument to be made that says, look, we should just become a satrapy of China, right? They're rich, we should just take it. We accept that we're part of their colonial empire and, get on with it. Now, I think that's the wrong decision. I think it's a
That won't bring you many votes, Tom.
No, exactly. I think it's a staggeringly stupid decision, but it's an argument, right? Depend more on China. I think you're completely wrong to do it, but there is an argument to do that. There is another argument that says, hang on a minute, we've got ourselves into this economic mess, and to the figures that you're talking about on Chinese investment, look at the investment these days rather than 20 years ago, and they're proportionally tiny numbers, because the reality is China isn't doing foreign direct investment anymore for a whole series of its own economic reasons. It's in a huge economic mess. So it's nothing to do with us. It's just to do with the fact that China has been unbelievably mismanaged by a communist party. I know this is going to shock you, but socialism doesn't work. And sorry, John. And
I think John would agree, wouldn't you, John?
It's been a while since I've been called a socialist.
Yeah,
but anyway, that's a separate.
So I think what they've done is they've got themselves into this bizarre position where they are listening to the logic of the Treasury from 20 years ago that got us into the golden era period. At a time when, look, I was critical of it at the time, but the argument was, you could make the argument. I didn't think it was a good argument, but you could make the argument. Now it is simply not possible to make that argument, but the Treasury is still doing it. And the Foreign Office is doing what the Foreign Office always does, which is maintaining relationships.
Right.
That's it.
But the thing is, you've got the Chinese spy scandal is one, fine, we've talked about that. But you've also got the super embassy being apparently built in London, or we don't know, but it looks like it's going to be. And you've got the Chagos deal.
Look, all of this.
I mean, this is surely more than just cock up.
It's worse than that. They believe it. They actually believe it.
They believe what?
They believe that once you have set a series of legal balls rolling, you have to take them to their logical conclusion.
Apart from, in the case of the Chinese spy scandal, when they're trying to use the law to stop, their knowledge of the law to stop it and quash it.
Well, this is why I think what they've actually done is they've allowed influence rather than specifically squashing. But look, I mean, whichever way it is, this is an administration that has simply forgotten that they are not international human rights lawyers. They are the advocates and champions of the British people. But you know what? They're not. They're not doing that. They should be, but they're not doing it.
Look, I don't necessarily resolve from any of that. Beyond that, I think in general their intentions are good, but I do believe that yes, they've lost their way on some of these key issues. But I think one point it's important to make is how difficult it has proved to change the Whitehall system in recent years, because I had the privilege of being a trade envoy, the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Tanzania under the last government, and in that time you had Liz Truss as International Secretary, Trade Secretary, Foreign Secretary, and then Prime Minister. You had Kemi Badenoch as Trade Secretary, both of whom took a much tougher and a view on China, which was closer aligned to where I think the country should be. But at that time, I raised with and Kemi in particular the fact that our export finance industry, which is a sort of low profile but relatively important building block in these trade deals, was actively at times soliciting Chinese investment to go into African nations, had an office in Beijing, and was making a mockery of everything that the politicians at the top were saying and genuinely believed in. But we didn't get close, actually, to even stopping that, never mind changing the system so that it actually worked the way that the political leaders want it to do.
I mean, Tom, did you ever do a Scary Storm out in Kenya?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, so you go down there and the entire place is just infested with Chinese diggers. You can see the writing is all on there. And, you know, the competing influence, you know, we're selling it that we're, you know, extending our influence to Kenya by training their army and using huge chunks of Samburu to blow up. And yet then you've got this clear Chinese kind of absolute domination of their infrastructure. So I think you're right, that doesn't necessarily work. But Tom, just to not push back, but just to, in the interest of political balance, clearly the last President Xi visit was under a conservative government.
It was a mistake.
The Huawei piece went through.
Until some of us rebelled and stopped it. Exactly. Yeah.
So how is this not continuity approach to China?
No, I agree. It is, and this is the problem. It is exactly the continuity approach, but it's the continuity approach from 2010 to sort of 2016, which was then dropped. I mean,
Cameron's golden era.
It was the golden era, exactly right. And you know, and to be fair to David Cameron, when he came back as Foreign Secretary, he was not advocating the golden era. He was advocating a changed relationship because, you know, there was an argument. Again, I say, you know, there was an argument. I mean, I don't think it didn't persuade me, but it was a possible argument that you saw the pattern of development in China from 1980 through to 2010, and you extrapolate that forward, and you think, well, look, this is, you know, it's liberalizing, it's inverted commas democratizing, not really, but you know, it is becoming freer in certain ways, particularly economically, and you're into that. I think it's Deng Xiaoping, but I'm going to get it wrong, so forgive me. But you know, I don't care whether the cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice, right? And it became not communism with Chinese characteristics, but just a new imperial state with a new imperial government. I mean, not particularly communist. And that was
the cat being
the state. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Sorry, the point about the cat was, I don't mind if development comes from the state or the private sector. I don't mind if you know, if it's state owned or it's private owned, whatever. And that was the economic point he was making. But you know, then Xi Jinping came in, and Xi Jinping has been completely consistent, right? I mean, Kevin Rudd wrote a fantastic book on Xi Jinping, which came out not very long ago, and he describes him very, very persuasively and convincingly as a Marxist nationalist. And you just need to look at his speeches. I mean, the funny thing about China is a lot of things in China aren't secret. They're just in Chinese, right? You just need to read them, right? Yeah. Read what Xi Jinping says. By the way, Google's pretty good at translating these days. And, you know, you can see what he's talking about. He is absolutely serious about a Marxist nationalism, with the party being the most important thing to survive, and then influence abroad according to, you know, various systems of governance that he's practiced at home. And, you know, the problem is we have so few people who read this. And then when they do read it, they say, oh, well, he didn't really mean that. It's like, yeah, he did.
But isn't that what the Foreign Office is for? And MI6 is for, and
denying what political leaders say that they mean that they really meant.
But what our national security infrastructure apparatus is there for, to stop infiltration by hostile.
So that's not MI6's job. That's MI5's job. But yeah, exactly.
All of them. I mean, the whole apparatus of our national security. I mean, we've got Chinese massive investment and influence in universities, which is a big part of their drive to steal our secrets and gain influence. We've got it in politics. We've got it with, you know, with trade. We've got it now with the Chagos Islands being handed to a close ally of theirs, which you said that the Chinese had bought an island next door to.
Yeah, I believe they're looking at.
That's the rumor. I haven't seen whether it's confirmed.
Yeah, so, I mean, are we just stupid?
Well, the problem is I don't think we're serious, and I feel, I mean, I used to get into arguments in government about this. It's like, you know, if you don't mind the fact that your country is changing in these radical ways or is being dominated by foreign powers, then stop paying the security forces, because you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money. If you do mind, then take it seriously. And taking it seriously means doing things like, you know, passing the new National Security Act, which I passed in 2023, and actually, you know, being serious about locking people up. You know, when I was security minister, we locked up more Russians and Chinese spies than we had done in the previous 2 decades. Now, that's not me who's doing it, right? I mean, obviously, it's MI5 and the police who's doing it, and they're absolutely brilliant. But making sure that they understand that you're going to have their back and that you're going to be on their side is really important. That's why this Chinese spy case is so important, because it makes the organizations think, well, hang on a minute, I do the hard work, and then you let them go anyway.
Take a step back, and the statement that you made just 5 minutes ago, that we're not serious when it comes to national security. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, but look around. I mean, tell me, honestly, do you think we are?
I don't.
Right.
But yeah,
I don't at all.
But you have parts of the system, senior parts of the system, that are deeply serious, and they are in constant tension with those that are prioritizing short-term economic gain, and it is the job of the centre to decide and lay down and set what the direction is. And at the moment, you are seeing a renaissance in those who say, no, actually, let's prioritize the economic, or let's prioritize the idea that we keep channels open. And
is that why the Muslim Brotherhood isn't banned? Is that why the IRGC isn't banned?
Exactly. That's it. Yeah. That is. I think that's a case in point, and anything that you can. Any light you can shed from being on the inside, where we have a clear understanding that for some time now you've had the Home Office and the domestic security services making the clear case to fully prescribe the IRGC. You've had a succession of leaders of parties or candidates to be leaders of parties who said that they were going to do it until they actually get in, and then they're sort of taken into a room and persuaded not to do it. And the upshot of this is that we are saying a bunch of serious sounding things about Iran. We've introduced this foreign influence registration scheme, which I think apparently has about 4 people.
Yeah. Sign up and tell us you're a spy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yet Iran is making these incursions into various parts of our civil and criminal life, and their chief agent, the IRGC, we don't want to fully prescribe because.
Well, let me put it this way. So we've seen in the past few weeks the Israeli football fans being banned from a game in Birmingham. We've seen a deadly attack on a synagogue in Manchester with 2 people losing their lives. We've seen the Gaza demonstrations continuing on October the 7th, shortly after that deadly attack in Manchester, clearly celebrating, and continuing ever since, despite the ceasefire having come into effect. How much of this do you both think would be eased if we were to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, as Nigel Farage has proposed, and the IRGC and any other Islamist groups?
So I'd be cautious about the IRGC in the sense that I'm sure they're behind it and I'm sure they're trying to organise it, but they're doing it from abroad. So, the reality is...
Well, they have a centre here, the Islamic Centre of England.
In the sense that we're pretty certain that's who's funding it, but they're funding it from abroad. Now, I don't think that these people should be taking the money, but actually, this is what's slightly irritating, because we had the debates about prescription when I was in, and personally, I would have done it. But I get the government's argument. The government's argument is we don't prescribe states, we only prescribe non-states, right? And the IRGC is part of the Iranian state.
So I prescribe, we mean for listeners, categorizing it as a terror.
Exactly.
As a
right. So the theory is, agree with this or not, but the theory in legal terms is states cannot commit terrorism. States can commit war crimes. Only non-states can commit terrorism. And given that you can only prescribe for terrorism, you can't prescribe a state. Now, I think this is slightly a distinction without a difference.
And the Americans have done it.
Yeah. Well, but their prescription is totally different from ours. They can continue to engage with the prescribed organisation. They can continue to fund it. You can continue to receive support from a prescribed organisation in the United States. In the UK, if you talk to somebody who's on the prescribed list, you can go to prison for years. So it's a totally different... They use the same word, but for a very different thing.
Right.
And so that's why when I was taking through the National Security Act, one of the things I put in there is a clause which says any assistance to a foreign intelligence service is a criminal offence. Now, effectively, it means that the IRGC is prescribed in the American sense. It goes further than the American prescription, but through a different law. Now, it doesn't have the symbolism.
And you would have done it anyway.
I'd have done it anyway, but because personally, I don't believe they're an integral part of the Iranian state. I know they're in the Iranian constitution, but I believe they're an adjunct to what we would recognise as a state. And I think that, frankly, the Iranians are playing fast and loose with definitions. So that's why I would have done it. But that doesn't mean there isn't a logic to the government's position. There is a logic. The problem with the Muslim Brotherhood, and by the way, I think, let me be absolutely clear, I think the Muslim Brotherhood is a heinous organization, which completely, not by chance, was founded roughly at the same time as the fascist movements in Europe, or the communist movements in Europe, and emerges from that same sort of zeitgeist of sort of, global, national, extremist elements. And it's not a surprise. And, whether you're looking at Qutb or Banna or whatever, these various different people, they emerge from that same feeling. And it's not an accident that they're banned in many Muslim countries, the United Arab Emirates. The Saudi king very famously said, when they asked to set up the Muslim Brotherhood in Saudi Arabia, he said, "Are we not all Muslim brothers in Saudi Arabia?" and then told him to go away. Now, the difference is that the Muslim Brotherhood is not an organization in the UK as such. There are many Muslim Brotherhood organizations, and we should
be covert.
Exactly right. And so what we should
That's the problem, though, isn't it?
It is, of course it is. Of course it is. Which is why, prescribing the Muslim Brotherhood doesn't really help you. What you've got to do is you've got to go after all of these different organizations. And that's what I started doing before, as John puts it, I was so rudely interrupted by an election.
But there's two related but distinct points on there. I think this is surely the point at which we should go the whole hog with the IRGC. And if one of the key issues is that they are able to funnel money into particular institutions, then yes, absolutely, we should make it clearer and easier to be able to cut that off.
Well, it is now technically under the National Security Act 2023, if you provide any material assistance to the IRGC, you have huge fines and huge criminal penalties. So if you buy them a cup of coffee, if you broadcast a video on their behalf, anything like that is material assistance.
But we are not being as effective as we need to.
That is true.
We're not getting the money coming into getting the money coming into various parts of public life. And I'm trying to look more at the network that there is of IRGC Iranian influenced charities here, where organizations are following the direct line of support for the Ayatollah, the Iranian state. There were funding issues, and yet they're not being shut down. The Charity Commission, what they will do is they'll go, "Oh, cripes, okay, well, we'll launch an investigation in this."
They don't have the personnel to do it.
They don't have the person. Yeah. Well, they get about 40 million quid a year. This is not insubstantial, but they don't. And then what will happen is that you say, well, this is so important that the police need to be involved. So there is a criminal investigation, and at that point, the Charity Commission go, "Oh, whoa, no, the police are involved now. We've got to wait for them to," and that can take years. Meanwhile, these organizations are just carrying on. They're not frozen, they're not suspended and stopped while the police investigation goes on. They can just operate freely. And so you've got this malign influence that is continuing.
Feels like what you're describing.
Birmingham gives us a good example, though. Yeah. If we look at the advice given to West Midlands Police, that came from the Hind Rajab Foundation, whose founder has clear links to Hezbollah, which means there must be an Iranian link there somewhere, because Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy organisation.
It's an IRGC proxy organisation.
Yeah. And so how on earth do you intercept that boundary? So we've got, rather than arresting the people involved, they're actually giving advice to our police forces.
But this is the other strand of the really important statement that Tom made, in that the last government was trying to get to grips with this. It was what Tom was doing in the Home Office. Then you had Michael Gove's extremism strategy, which was much more explicit, that actually seeking to undermine the UK's democratic institutions was an act of extremism, and it decoupled the idea that it necessarily had to be involved in violent acts. And that got sort of, as you can imagine, bogged down in who you were going to name, and it didn't get over the line. It wasn't fully activated, I think, before the election, but I think it was the right approach, because it would posit Muslim Brotherhood related groups as seeking to undermine the UK's democracy, and therefore you could have a clearer strategy in tackling them.
And let's be quite clear about this. There's what Michael was doing was incredibly important. what I was doing, I hope, was important as well. One of the things that has come up in recent days from certain people, particularly, forgive me, but certainly people on the left, is that somehow this is discriminatory. Total rubbish. Sorry, forgive me, complete crap. The number of Muslim families I met as security minister who would ask privately and quietly, please, can you deal with this? Pointing out to me, correctly, by the way, that it wasn't my son who was at risk of radicalization and perhaps going and fighting in some dreadful war overseas. It was theirs. And they correctly said to me, and I completely agree with them, that their children, just because they're Muslim, their children deserve exactly the same protection from the British state as any other child in the UK. And they're completely right. They do. And tolerating this extremism puts actually, the whatever it is, 80, 90%, 99% of people who are perfectly ordinary law-abiding citizens, it puts them and their children in the front line. And it's deeply unfair, and actually it's deeply, deeply discriminatory.
And you're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood active within Muslim societies.
Exactly right.
Radicalising and also preventing integration.
Exactly right. So what I'm saying is, to be very clear, is if the government chooses to ignore radicalisation from extremist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, what they're actually saying is Muslims are worth culturally less in Britain than anybody else, because will tolerate the fact that their children will be will be subject to extremism. I think that's deeply, deeply wrong. I think it's deeply discriminatory. I believe that every British citizen has the same right to the protection of the state, and the protection of the state means the protection from extremism that is more likely to radicalise them. Now, 70, 80, well, more like 100 years ago, it was much more likely that somebody from a Catholic background would have been radicalised into various forms of fascism. You can look at the history of this. I'm afraid, sadly, it's true. That isn't a threat now. 40 years ago, it was much more likely that somebody of Irish background was more likely to be radicalised in some form of Irish violence. Again, thank God, that's not true anymore. Now, very sadly, it happens to be today that Muslim kids are more likely to be radicalised in some form of extremism from an Islamic background than kids from another background. I mean, that's perfectly honest. And it's our job to protect every child in this country.
Exactly so. And that's one of the reasons why the current debate over are we going to have a government-sanctioned definition of so-called Islamophobia is so important. Because this has been an organised campaign for years by malign actors within Muslim community organizations who are indeed, in many ways, often linked back to Brotherhood-aligned organizations, to say that what Tom has just said is prejudiced, is Islamophobic. It must not be said. And the Labour Party went way too far down this track. They adopted it as official policy, and Corbyn years there were a bunch of people who frankly should and probably do know better who went along with this, and we are now unpicking it and hopefully on the brink of actually getting to a more sensible place.
To be fair, Shabana Mahmood's been pretty good on this, actually.
Yeah.
She's been very sensible on this because, unsurprisingly, she's not only Home Secretary, but she herself is a practicing Muslim, and she understands that the kind of Islam that is being spoken about by the Brotherhood is hate preaching.
But the extremists come to government and say, we represent the entire Muslim community.
Yeah, I used to have this.
And any attack on us is an attack on the entire Muslim community. It's Islamophobic. So you attack me for being extreme, you're attacking all Muslims. And then Labour just backs down and says, we don't want to be Islamophobic.
I'm the Muslim Council for Britain, and the clue is in the title. I speak for all Muslims.
I used to refuse to meet them. And I refuse to meet them for the very simple reason that they don't represent anybody. I will speak to imams about their particular mosque. Yeah. And otherwise, I will speak to the elected representative of whatever community it is, and that's the MP or the councillor.
But these are the groups advising Labour on this Islamophobia definition.
Yeah, and
these are the people advising them on it.
They should drop it. It's. And by the way, if you didn't, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about other podcasts.
You are.
So is that,
no, you're not.
Is that yes? This is. I'm crossing the ultimate sin here.
The other place.
We'll edit it later.
Nick Timothy gave a very, very powerful speech to Policy Exchange that was broadcast the other day, and he correctly takes us through the history of this country and the religious wars that we fought. I mean, we forget it, but we fought religious wars from sort of the 1500s through to about the 1800s. Now, they weren't always violent. Sometimes they were sort of legal and control and silencing, and takes us through the test acts of the 1640s and 50s and so on. And points out that this kind of silencing, this kind of extremism that uses religion to silence, first of all, it's not new, right? We've been through it before. The emancipation of Jews and Catholics in this country came in 1829. Before that, you and I were not only not allowed to be parliamentarians, we wouldn't have been allowed to be doctors, we wouldn't have been allowed to be in the army, wouldn't have been allowed to go to university.
And Andrew as well, actually, is Catholic.
Oh, you're a Catholic as well? Oh, well, there you go. Well, you're also banned.
Yeah.
John, you're the only one who's allowed to be in Parliament, are you?
I'm a good High Anglican.
There you go. Well, you're fine anyway.
He's a lord, so he can't certainly be in the House of Commons. But if I could just jump in very briefly. On the House of Commons, how worried are you that so toxic as this debate got that we have four, arguably five extremist MPs sat as Gaza independents who frankly, obviously it was Ayub Khan who was behind a lot of the shenanigans in Birmingham with the football this week. Does that bother you? Is that something we should be concerned about? Is it going to get worse?
Of course. And the election campaign was hideous. And actually there's unfinished business to go back and look in more detail at the drivers of that intimidation, which deeply affected many MPs who kind of clung on, and some actually that were wiped out in campaigns that were abusive, intimidatory, and to all intents and purposes highly organized. But there has not been the analysis of that. And then since the election, actually, there's been a period where these Gaza independents have often sort of seemed quite thoughtful in their manner and in some of the things that they've said. And while the Maccabi Tel Aviv incident is horrendous and it brings deep shame on those parliamentarians who pushed for the ban and a stain on the city and the country, the one helpful thing is that I think it has shown the true colours of these MPs and what they actually stand for, what their approach is, and we need to be, I think, resolute, and Labour in particular, because often these are Labour-facing constituencies or have been in the past. They need to be sufficiently bold to call this out and to present an alternative.
Do you think it really has revealed them to people? Because there was a poll that showed that most people in Britain, or I think it was quite close, but most people thought that the ban was a good idea to protect public safety. That was the lie. That was the narrative being pushed by the people who had targeted the Israeli team and their fans from the beginning, from the moment that the draw was announced. They had the petition, the threats about showing no mercy to the fans. The threat actually was against the Israeli fans, but they managed to persuade the British public that the threat was from the Israeli fans. Do you think that really people are wise to that?
Look, this is a fast moving situation, and you can absolutely track that the campaign, when they started this campaign a few weeks ago, there was no mention of hooliganism at all. It was out and out boycott, and then it was, oh no, these people will fear for their safety because it's all troubled, and then suddenly it's like, oh no, we meant hooligans all along. And maybe in terms of the public opinion, but I think it's really opened people's eyes in Westminster, and I hope that it leads to a redoubling of the focus in the need to have a genuine strategy and on the centre and the left to beat the movements behind these people, and then understanding that the way to beat them is not to split the difference, because you can never appease the political movement behind this. They would never be your friends. You can't sort of say, oh no, it's okay, we recognise a state of Palestine now, and everyone goes, hooray, okay, you're the good guys, we'll fall in behind you. That's never going to happen. And I think there needs to be an awakening that there has to be a different strategy to be able to win back trust in areas like this.
Which brings us to the protests.
It does.
Yeah. And, if you've been enjoying the conversation so far, don't panic. To catch the rest of the episode, just head over to our Substack at thebrinkpodcast.co.uk.
And if you're listening on audio, remember that if you go to our Substack and become a paid subscriber, you can then download the full audio episode without the paywall. It will appear in your podcast app with a yellow title rather than a white one.